Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. The New Stack thanks the Code team for sponsoring our podcast from KubeCon CloudNativeCon in Austin, Texas. Learn more about the open source projects Code is supporting and its team of passionate open source engineers and advocates building community through contribution and engagement in emerging technologies. Learn more about Code at thecodeteam.com. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack. We're live here at KubeCon. Hey guys, how are you?
We're fine.
Great.
Good.
So we're going to talk about storage in 1.9, and I'd like to touch on CSI and some of the other kind of topics that are relevant, here at a show like KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon. But first, can you please introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Michael Rubin. I'm a tech lead and manager for one of the managers of the Kubernetes team at Google, working on infrastructure. I've been doing storage for 20 years and also work on operating systems, container runtimes, multi-cluster, and a whole bunch of things.
My name is Vladimir Vivien from the Code organization inside Dell. We're an open source outfit that promotes open source both within and outside the company.
So we're talking about storage in the 1.9 release in Kubernetes that's coming up, and we're talking about how you've been approaching storage kind of as a project. So I'd like to just back up a little bit and talk about that approach. What is that approach that the group has been working on that's been like part then as a role has been in discussion and been debated, and now what we'll actually see when it comes out in the next week or two?
So Kubernetes storage it's less about what people traditionally think of as storage, like from a Dell EMC company where they're doing speeds and feeds and like microchips and disk heads. It's a lot about matchmaking and provisioning that storage inside of a cloud-native way. And for 1.9, a lot of the planning that we've done for the last 3 to 4 months has finally come to fruition, where we've had this code now in 1.9 available in alpha for folks. This includes treating local storage, finally, as if remote storage. We've got topological scheduling of storage. We've got block addressing of storage, so it's no longer just the POSIX mount interface. And we also have CSI, and Snapshots is finally beginning to make its way into alpha.
What would you say are some of the things that have been consuming your time kind of in the context of 1.9? What have been some of the major kind of work that you've been doing
Absolutely.
on a daily basis?
So for the last 3 weeks, I've been heads down working on the implementation for CSI inside Kubernetes. And once that comes out in 1.9, anyone who wants to write their own volume driver for Kubernetes will be able to do so using the CSI interface, which is the container storage interface. So using that interface, and really because we're using gRPC inside for the implementation, using that interface, and conceivably with any language, you can write your own volume driver that communicates with Kubernetes at runtime.
It's been really frustrating for the vendors to get their functionality into Kubernetes, and it's been blocked by, honestly, a handful of heroes who have been doing all the code reviews for the 10 or 20 plugins that we have got now, and there's like 10 or 20 more vendors who want to get that work in Kubernetes. It doesn't scale to have this stuff all in the tree itself. And with CSI now, we enable out of tree, and this is a trend that you're seeing across Kubernetes, but what's nice about storage is the interface is fairly well understood. So we're not doing object storage, we're doing POSIX and block addresses. So it's well understood, and with CSI, we can focus more on the life cycle of these plugins, and everything else is sort of predetermined.
So who's doing that review then?
The review of the code, or
you
the in-tree stuff?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been a collection so far, and I hope I don't miss anybody, but it's been mostly, I think, Google and Red Hat that have been doing the brunt of the in-tree reviews. I think that's fair to say. It's been about, I can give the names. I mean, I think Jan's doing a lot of this, Saad has been doing a lot, but it's really been about 4 or 5 people, and it's kind of held us back from adding a lot of really cool functionality, because we want to be fair to everyone in the community. And the other problem is if someone has a bug in Kubernetes, their plugin, you have to wait 3 months possibly before you can address it.
Okay.
And this allows companies to release software in their own cadence and control things themselves.
So let's back up a little bit for, about CSI. CSI, there was lib storage before CSI, right? I mean, was lib storage related to CSI or not?
No, so lib storage was an attempt from Dell EMC about a year ago. It was the same idea.
Right.
So it kind of floated around for a while, and then eventually that idea kind of bubbled up from our face-to-faces that we've had maybe earlier this year.
It was the Goldilocks problem. There were a lot of candidates to be this interface.
Right.
Remember those days?
There are other candidates other than CS. We also has Flex, try to solve the same problem or similar problem.
Yeah, Flex was a prototype.
Right.
I mean, CSI almost became called Flex 2.0.
Right.
But even from Dell EMC, there was was it SDS or Open SDS or something? There were a lot of candidates both in industry and in the community to try to address the problem of out-of-tree plugins. And I call it the Goldilocks problem because some of them were too far along and too hard to change and mold into what we wanted for Kubernetes. Some of them were too early and maybe behind what we had designed for Flex. And so what was really great about what Dell EMC did was, lib storage does a lot more than just enable out-of-tree plugins. It actually is, I believe, a much more detailed and management stack for storage overall. Is that true?
Lib storage was also part of Rexray, which is a CLI tool that does, like Mike just said, a slew of functionality as well.
Okay.
And CSI's origins were actually, even outside of Kubernetes, it came about because all of the orchestrators had noticed they were having the same problem. They all wanted to have storage plugins, and the vendors did not want to write one for Docker, one for Mesos, one for Kubernetes. What this allows is you write, it's kind of the miracle of write once, run anywhere. So you can write your plugin once, it works for all of these orchestration systems, and a bunch of engineers really came together and focused on making this work for the industry. And what was really great was that Dell EMC, I don't want to embarrass you, they volunteered Vlad to get involved and work with people from Mesos, I think G, people from Google SOD, who had already sort of started some design work and follow through. I find that in open source, starting things is not always as hard as actually really, really finishing them tightly. And that's it.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I don't want to take any glory from, Clint was involved heavily in this. So actually he was one of the major driver
for lib storage, right?
From lib storage and eventually CSI and get that idea accepted by different vendors. Not just us at Dell, but a slew of other vendors too. So, I mean, CSI being what it is today was a culmination of a lot of efforts, a lot of discussions, both online and offline. We have tons of notes on Google Docs that shows the history of CSI going back to when it first started. It was a lot of back and forth, but eventually it became something that everybody want to live with and start the implementation.
And it's neat because it solved a problem for many different groups. So if you look at it from the Dell EMC traditional storage vendors, you could see that they were pushing this and it got the adoption, but it was quickly recognizable as they just wanted any standard, and that this one was viable because everyone was working on it together. So, the Kubernetes SIG it almost worked outside of SIGs, and I remember we had to take this to the Kubernetes SIG and sell them on the idea that we would continue with this, and if it didn't work well with Kubernetes, that we wouldn't try to force it down Kubernetes' throats. And once everyone kind of relaxed a little bit and realized we're just focusing on solving the technical problem, it almost didn't need any selling. It was really interesting to me how it's a plugin system, which suddenly became very glamorous in the community. There's so many things going on in 1.9 with storage, and yet, people are, I think the reason they're so excited about CSI is it allows their companies and their storage solutions to work with Kubernetes and sort of unleashes a whole bunch of people to fit into the system.
So, So Kubernetes is inherently complex. I mean, understandably so, since we're talking about distributed architectures, which are relatively new to most, to most people, to most developers, and most engineers. Would you argue that? I mean,
yeah, I guess you're right. I forget that sometimes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
I've been doing this a while.
You're building out networks for clusters, and so so it's a different kind of history for you. But for a lot of people, so what are those pillars that you've had to live by to try to, when you're building out storage for 1.9, that are most relevant to those users out there who are really needing ways to consume storage and ways to provision storage?
So in 1.9, I mean, do you want to?
I'll start with what I'm familiar with. I think part of what we're going to see with 1.9, as Mike had mentioned, we have local storage and block storage coming, but with CSI itself, I think part of it's almost like the liberation of the vendor to take how storage interact with Kubernetes in whichever way they want, as long as it abides by the CSI protocol. The way they implement it could be however they want. So I think in that sense, the user will benefit from what we're doing right now.
Yeah, there's two users here in my mind. And Kubernetes has to serve three masters in my opinion. Actually four, but I don't think the fourth is useful for this conversation. One of them is the infrastructure and the vendors, and I think this is where Vlad is most familiar and where CSI helps. The other one is the cluster administrator, and then the third one is the app developer. The app developer's world should hopefully not change that much in 1.9 at all, except that they should have a much better experience with local storage, which they didn't have enabled before that. So they can start looking at running more complex applications like databases inside of Kubernetes as opposed to outside. Cluster administrators, though, they've got a much easier world. And so this will help, 1.9 helps them quite a bit.
Okay, the cluster administrators.
Yeah. And the reason is that if you take a look at Kubernetes storage overall, a lot of what its job is to make the cluster administrator not have to talk that much to the infrastructure folks, to build up programmatic models so that things just happen automatically. And what happens in 1.9 is a lot of the pillars that you discussed, they've been built already, but they haven't been shored up really solidly. And so what Tim Hawkins says a lot is, we left a lot of the hard questions for later, and we're really tackling them now. Making local storage work required Michelle Au to work with the scheduling team, Bobby Salamat, David Oppenheimer, and Jan, and to really figure out how to integrate scheduling and storage together as one system. That's a lot of brain surgery, which is why we're going to take our time to do this right. But the benefit is great.
But the difference, so that in comparison of, for instance, how Mesos manages storage is different, isn't it? I mean, obviously, because they have a two-tier scheduler.
Right, and we're moving from a two-tier, we call it like scheduling and then binding. You schedule the pod and then you bind your storage to the, you bind your reference to storage to the storage itself. We're moving away from that model now because we find that for local storage, it creates too many corner cases and race conditions, and it breaks the simple model we want to offer the user.
What do you think?
I think that's great. I mean, local storage, I think, will open the door for a new type of applications running on Kubernetes that we're not seeing today. It'll make it easier to build stuff like, databases that need storage locally, etc. I think local storage and developments like that will definitely help Kubernetes
and hardware opens the door. Now suddenly you can do like the NVMe interface, you can do SSDs locally. Instead of having to do these things over a network interface, you can really do things. If you're an on-prem shop, you want to do high-end, high-performance local storage, which a lot of the telcos opens up a whole new customer base that would be very difficult to manage before this. So in my mind, we're opening up some big doors finally.
Interesting. So, in conclusion, where do you guys want to take? Where do you want to take things from here after 1.9?
1.10.
What?
Said 1.10. I think we're it's such a high velocity project that I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, what would be some of what are some of the thematic aspects to what you've been doing that you'll see extended into future releases, I guess.
I mean, speaking for CSI, so the release that's coming out in 1.9 is going to be labeled alpha.
Yeah.
So which implies that there'll be a beta and possibly GA, etc.
Yeah.
So we're going to be living with CSI development for quite a while until it gets stable.
The holiday gift for everyone is the alpha.
Right.
The summer fun is going to be when companies can really rely on this stuff in production.
Right.
But the theme post that, in my opinion, is once we get out of the in-tree and out-of-tree games, we can start to really play with advanced hardware. We can start to truly play, like snapshots didn't make it this quarter. So that's going to be something that starts coming in, much requested feature beginning of next year.
Well, on that note, I just want to wish you both the happy holidays.
Thank you.
And we'll see that alpha release, and then the summertime we'll get,
We'll party.
We'll party.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be at the beach. Okay, thank you guys.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank you very
for your
much.
time.
This is a pleasure.
Great. The News Stack thanks the Code team for sponsoring our podcast from KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon in Austin, Texas. Learn more about the open source projects Code is supporting and its team of passionate open source engineers and advocates building community through contribution and engagement in emerging technologies. Learn more about Code at thecodeteam.com. Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.